Shalom uvracha to everyone on this Thursday morning, Thanksgiving Day 2020, Erev Shabbat, Parshat Vayeitzei. And it's wonderful to speak with you, everybody. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Thanksgiving and a wonderful Shabbat. And if we continue to daven for all those who are not feeling well and who are ill, and we continue to hope for the best. We had some very encouraging news with the vaccines in the last few weeks, and hopefully that they will come quickly and hopefully bring within the next half year, will bring this pandemic to a close. Again, everyone should please continue to be safe and follow the best protocols and be careful. Going with masks and social distancing and hand hygiene, all the important things, and make sure to isolate if you have symptoms, and please, everyone should take care and be well. Parshat Vayeitzei, which is very interesting, comes out very often around Thanksgiving, and of course it's very interesting that Yaakov Avinu, so to speak, begins his full adult life in this parsha. And he gets married, he has children. In fact, one of his children is Yehuda, which is connected in the Bible. It says the etymology is Hapa'am Odeh Hashem. I'm going to thank God for this experience, for this child, for everything that has happened. And of course, Yehuda becomes a very central character in Yaakov's life and in the biblical narrative as it is in terms of Malchut Yehuda, Kingdom of Judah, and we ultimately, our name, our eponymous name comes from Judah. But I want to focus a little bit in this Dvar Torah, the short Dvar Torah, on the beginning of the Parsha. The beginning of the Parsha, of course, Yaakov is alone. He is struggling. He has a dream. According to some modern commentaries, the dreaming itself and the discomfort is a result of his ambivalence of leaving home under very challenging circumstances, having to leave his parents, who possibly he will never see again in their life, at a point of great strife with his sibling, with Esav. So there's a lot going on internally, psychologically, and it's a very, very difficult time. Yaakov is alone. It's not clear that he will have enough sustenance, enough food. He's cut off from his family. He's cut off from sustenance and from what he knew. And God appears to him. And God appears to him and makes him a covenantal blessing in this very beautiful scene of the dream at the very beginning of the parasha. And God promises him a covenantal promise. In the context of the dream, he sees God. He sees angels. And just as Abraham was visited by angels. And God says, Ani Hashem Elohei Avraham Avicha Elohei Yitzchak, Haaretz she'ata shochev aleh l'chatnena u'lzarecha. You will get this land. It's a covenantal blessing. Vayazaracha ka'afar haaretz u'faratzta yama v'kedma v'tzafona v'negba. It's a very distant but very powerful havtacha, promise by God, that he will fulfill the destiny of his father and grandfather, and he will have this tremendous nation. And ultimately it will have a universal impact. And God says, I will restore you and return you. So God has a very grand vision for Jacob. God has a very grand vision for the future. God is promising Jacob that he will be part of the Shoshelet, part of the lineage of the patriarchs, of bringing forth into being the covenantal people, the holy people, Am Yisrael, that will ultimately have an impact on the whole world. And it's interesting, Jacob at first, and recognizes the transcendence of the moment. Achen yesh, as he gets up, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. Indeed, God is here. Vanochi lo yadati. I didn't know, I didn't appreciate. Vayira vayomar manora makom hazeh. He understands how auspicious auspicious this place is. But he goes back to sleep, and in the morning he gets up, and he calls the place Beit El, and Jacob makes a neder. Vayomer im Elohim imadi ushmarani baderech hazeh, asher anochi holech v'natan li lechem le'echol ubeged lilbosh. V'shavti b'shalom beit avi v'ayah Adonai li le'elohim. It's very interesting. Jacob repeats part of what God said, but he doesn't speak in the long term. He doesn't speak in the distance. He doesn't speak about v'nivruchu b'cha kol mishpachot adama. He doesn't speak about ufaratzta yam avakedma. He doesn't speak about that blessing of the future, of yam avakedma. He doesn't speak about all those things. He speaks in very prosaic, narrow terms. He doesn't mention the land and the promise of the land. He simply asks God, "V'natan li lechem le'echol ubeged lilbosh." God, if you give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, if you sustain me on the basic level and return me to the house of my father, v'shavti b'shalom el beit avi, I'm able to come back to my house and maybe to see my parents one last time, v'ayah Hashem li le'elokim, then God will be my God. It's a kind of dayenu, that this will be enough to fulfill what I hope. And there's something, again, very powerful. In the midst of the moment of Jacob being alone, and Jacob being in distress, and Jacob being ambivalent, and Jacob being running away, on one level, yes, he understands that he has a covenantal destiny. He understands that he is going to be the vehicle to fulfill the dreams and the hopes and the promises of Abraham and Isaac. But at this moment, Jacob, like many of us, Jacob is just, so to speak, ensconced in the present and in the context of the present, making sure that and hoping that he will be able to live and make it through this difficult period. This period that he's experiencing food insecurity, lechem lechol, beged lilbosh, and a place to sleep. He has to sleep on a rock. He doesn't have place. And on many levels, there's a kind of, I feel, a very identification, I think, for many people for the last few months, and still in the midst of this, in the midst of the pandemic. I think many of us, some people want to already think about, what's the ultimate meaning of the pandemic? And some people want to talk about what's going to be different about our life, and what's going to be different, and what spiritually, economically, as a society, the economy, the structure, all these things, these broad vision things. But right now, there are still many people who are just simply trying to get through. Many of us, Baruch Hashem, have been able to weather the storm in health and economically. But there are many people, both in our community and especially outside of our middle class community, who just the question of having enough food on the table, food insecurity, and clothing, and a place to shelter, has been exasperated by the pandemic and by the challenges. And there's a certain kind of dissonance when you read, that the stock market went up to 30,000 this week points, and our 401ks are going through the roof, and the food banks are not able to come, to keep up in this country with the needs of so many people. And we have to live that dissonance, and we have to try to address and make sure that we are imitating God, and that we feel that pain of people and try to do whatever we can to help internally within our community, to help those get a job, help those make sure that they have enough money and enough food and enough shelter. And also beyond that, as citizens of our community, as citizens of our state, as citizens of our country, to make sure that we do whatever we can to push the government and our elected officials to do all that they can to make sure that people have beged lilbosh and lechem lechol, pshuto k'mashma'o. And at the same time, that which the government can't do, every person has a responsibility to them, their own family, first of all, and of course their neighbors, and then beyond that, whatever we can do in terms of helping um, to make sure. And, Yaakov, in that dark and lonely night, who was alone, he was comforted by God. He had a revelation from God. Not everyone can get a revelation from God, but we are God's instruments in the world to try to comfort the bereaved, help the sick, help those who are destitute in the best way that we can, and especially during this pandemic. And then we hope, this week for all of us, that sense, even if we have enough food and we have enough drink and we have enough clothing, but that feeling of being cut off from family, from Beit Avi, I think is very intense today for many of us on Thanksgiving and this Shabbos, when many of us might get together with distant cousins and extended family, and all that we're not all around the table. We're on Zoom visiting people. And when we have that, we all feel that. So we want Hashem, please, to V'shavti el Beit Avi, let us return to the home, that we can go back and have that extended family next Thanksgiving and have all that. So we all have that prayer, but also the Beged Lilbosh and the Lechem Lechol, everything that we can do to help those who are feeling that Yaakov experience. Shabbat Shalom to everyone, and those who are able to come on Shabbat, and I get to see them I'll see them in person, but especially to those who I don't get to see, Shabbat Shalom and happy Thanksgiving.